If you take a close look at the structural features of ancient buildings scattered across the globe, it becomes obvious that the official version of their origin simply doesn't hold water. We are facing an architectural paradox. Structures allegedly built for people of our height are completely non-ergonomic for modern humans. Look at the entrances of historical cathedrals, palaces, and administrative buildings from the so-called antique or colonial era. The doorways often reach 5 or even 6 meters in height. This isn't just decoration or a tribute to divine greatness, as art historians try to convince us. This is a functional necessity for beings of a completely different scale. Modern civilization is forced to adapt these giant portals to our modest physical parameters. We cut small standard doors into the bottom of huge gates, creating ridiculous door-within-a-door constructions. After all, opening an original door weighing several hundred kilograms is simply impossible for an ordinary person. We behave like new tenants who have moved into a house left by giants, trying to somehow adapt their colossal everyday life to our dwarfish needs. But it doesn't end with doors. Inside, we find door handles located at head level or even higher, impossible to reach without effort. Luxurious mirrors hang above fireplaces, but their bottom edge is 2.5 or 3 meters up. Who could look into such a mirror? For a person of our height, it's pointless. We would only see the reflection of the ceiling. But for someone over 3 meters tall, it would be perfectly placed at eye level. The steps in these buildings are often too high for a comfortable stride, and the ceilings soar so high that heating them with primitive wood stoves seems absurd. Everything points to the fact that these spaces were created for a race that physically exceeded us by 1.5 to 2 times. These aren't fantasies, but facts backed by numerous archaeological finds, which, however, have been systematically removed from public access. Archives are full of reports about excavations of giant skeletons. In North America, specifically around the Cahokia Mounds and near St. Louis, remains of humans ranging from 2.5 to over 3 meters tall were regularly found in the 19th and early 20th centuries. These weren't isolated cases of genetic abnormalities like gigantism, but mass burials of entire communities. However, as soon as such artifacts fell into the hands of official scientific institutions like the Smithsonian, they vanished without a trace. There is evidence and newspaper clippings from that time describing how bones were hauled away by the truckload, hidden in storage, or, what's even worse, destroyed, or simply dumped into the ocean to hide the inconvenient truth. In the new picture of the world being built for us, there was no place for giants. Their existence would destroy the neat theory of evolution and steady progress from primitive to complex. After all, if those who lived before were bigger, stronger, and likely smarter than us, then we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but perhaps a degrading branch. Most likely, the biosphere of the past was radically different. Atmospheric pressure was different, and oxygen levels were higher, allowing flora and fauna to reach gigantic sizes. Trees were taller, animals were larger, and humans, as part of this system, matched it. This explains how megalithic structures were built that modern machinery cannot handle. It is more logical to assume that huge blocks were moved by huge people, possessing the appropriate strength and tools, rather than believing fairy tales about thousands of slaves with ropes and bronze chisels. We see traces of a civilization of titans that was intentionally erased from our memory, leaving us only the role of small people living in their huge, cold houses. But physical power and height were far from the only advantages of our predecessors. Their intellectual potential and technical equipment were at a level we are only beginning to rediscover, and in many aspects they were far ahead. They possessed knowledge about the nature of energy and matter that is considered lost or classified today. And one of the most striking proofs of their technological superiority was crossed out of history with particular care, turned into a caricature, even though it once gave humanity true freedom of movement. We are persistently told that the 19th century was an era of coal, steam, horse-drawn traction, and primitive mechanics. A time when humanity was only clumsily beginning to master industrial technologies. However, this official picture cracks at the seams if you simply turn to the forgotten chronicles of aviation and energy of that period. The reality is that our ancestors possessed transport and energy capabilities that surpassed much of what we have today in terms of comfort, environmental friendliness, and efficiency. One of the grandest symbols of this stolen era was the Celestial Fleet, armadas of majestic airships that plowed the oceans of the air, connecting continents. Modern propaganda has intentionally distorted the image of the airship, turning it in the mass consciousness into a clumsy, dangerous gas balloon with a cramped gondola tied to the bottom. They instilled a fear of these giants in us, using the Hindenburg disaster as a public execution of an entire industry. But the true airships of the old world were completely different. These were real flying cities, cruise liners of the skies, where passengers didn't sit in cramped seats strapped in with belts, but moved freely inside a massive hull. There were restaurants, promenade decks, ballrooms, and comfortable cabins. It was the most elegant, silent, and luxurious way to travel humanity has ever known. These titans were distinguished by incredible payload capacity and safety, capable of carrying thousands of people and tons of cargo, smoothly docking at the spires of skyscrapers in the center of megacities. The high-rise buildings of New York, Chicago, and other cities were originally designed as mooring masts, stations for celestial vessels, where passengers stepped onto platforms directly from the ship, bypassing traffic on the ground. But airships were just the tip of the iceberg. The very infrastructure of cities from that time hints at the use of a fundamentally different type of energy, what is today called atmospheric electricity or ether energy. Metal domes of temples, tower spires, obelisks, and columns, arranged in strict geometric order, served not as religious decor, but as technical devices, resonators and receivers of free energy. Cities literally glowed without wires and coal power plants. We find evidence of wireless public transport, trams and trolleybuses that moved without overhead lines, receiving energy remotely. In old footage, you can see electric cars, scooters, and even devices resembling modern hoverboards. Moreover, there were automatic parking technologies and complex mechanical systems that we reinvented only a century later. This leads us to a frightening conclusion. Technological progress as we know it is a fiction. We aren't being shown anything new. We are only being given back, teaspoon by teaspoon, what was taken from the previous civilization. The elites who seized control of the world blocked access to free and clean technologies to hook humanity onto the needle of hydrocarbons and paid resources. And then, decades later, they begin to present old developments as innovations, selling us our own forgotten history in beautiful packaging. Electric cars and green energy of the 21st century are just miserable crumbs from the table of those who lived here before us. We use the debris of a great civilization without even suspecting it. A logical question arises. Where did this highly developed, harmonious world disappear to? Why were technologies forgotten and airships destroyed? Why did we switch from clean ether to dirty oil? The answer is terrifying. This golden age did not end naturally. It didn't fade away on its own. It was purposefully and brutally destroyed, wiping cities and their inhabitants off the face of the earth, to build a new, obedient, and dependent world on the smoking ruins. And the traces of this global crime, this war against the past, are captured in stone that melted like wax. The history of the so-called Great Fires of the 19th century is one of the most poorly tailored myths used to cover up events that resemble a military operation rather than a natural disaster. Since school, we've been told touching but absolutely absurd legends, like the story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a kerosene lamp and burning the great city of Chicago to the ground in 1871. This tall tale is meant to explain the inexplicable, how huge, monumental megacities built of brick, granite, and marble could vanish in flames with such speed, as if they were made of dry straw. If we discard children's fairy tales and look at the facts from the perspective of physics and materials science, the official version turns to dust. Stone and brick do not burn. They might crack from heat or get covered in soot, but they cannot serve as fuel for a fire capable of destroying city blocks to zero. To turn a brick building into a pile of molten mass or dust, a temperature of over 1,100 degrees Celsius is required. An ordinary household fire, even the strongest one burning wood and furniture, rarely exceeds 500 or 600 degrees. However, the aftermath of fires in Chicago, Boston, Seattle, St. Petersburg, and dozens of other cities shows us a picture of total thermal impact, comparable to the work of a blast furnace or the aftermath of carpet bombing. Buildings didn't just scorch, they melted. Metal turned into liquid puddles, and stone crumbled into sand. This forces us to hypothesize the use of technologies far beyond the scope of official history. We are talking about directed energy weapons or a deliberate overload of that very atmospheric ether grid we mentioned earlier. Perhaps the fires were the result of an attack on the planet's energy grid. If cities were receivers of free energy, a powerful electromagnetic pulse or a focused beam could cause instant overheating of conductors inside the building structures, causing them to ignite from the inside or literally melt. This explains the selectivity of some destruction, where one building turned into ruins while the neighbor remained untouched, as if the weapon operator was choosing targets. We see similar anomalies in modern disasters. For example, in the recent tragic events in Maui, where the fire behaved unnaturally intelligently. The scale of destruction suggests a global clearing of territory. It wasn't a series of accidents, but a planned operation to demolish the old world. The geography of the disasters is striking. From North America to Eurasia, city after city was subjected to destruction during the very period when the redistribution of world power was taking place. We see evidence that some natural objects, which we consider rocks or canyons today, may actually be the melted ruins of even more ancient Cyclopean structures destroyed by similar weapons in time immemorial. History repeats itself, and the 19th century was the final chord of another reset. Particular attention is drawn to the phenomenon of empty cities, captured in panoramic shots of that time, taken shortly before or immediately after the disasters. We see the majestic avenues of San Francisco, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, completely devoid of signs of life. Huge, beautiful buildings stand, but there are no people, no carriages, no animals on the streets. The cities look extinct, as if a neutron bomb destroyed biological life, leaving the architecture untouched. This creates an eerie feeling that the population was either evacuated or destroyed even before the phase of physical destruction or infrastructure restructuring began. Thus, a picture of a grand crime emerges before us. A highly developed civilization was liquidated, its cities burned out or captured empty. The previous owners disappeared, leaving behind only ruins and melted stone. But the architectural skeleton of the civilization survived, and the invaders needed to urgently breathe new life into it to launch their economic mechanisms. The system required working hands, millions of new, obedient creatures who did not remember their kinship or past, ready to silently clear the rubble and build a new order on the bones of giants. and these new inhabitants appeared, as if out of nowhere, on an industrial scale. After the smoke of the great fires cleared, and the ruins of once majestic megacities cooled, the new masters of the world faced a serious logistical problem. The cities stood empty. The infrastructure, though damaged, retained its skeleton, but the main element was missing: the human resource. It was during this period, at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, that the world faced an inexplicable demographic phenomenon that historians prefer to describe with dry statistical reports, avoiding uncomfortable questions. We are talking about the sudden appearance of millions of orphans. Where did such a colossal number of infants and teenagers without parents come from overnight? Where did the entire adult population disappear to, who should have given birth to and raised them? In the United States, as well as in Europe and the Russian Empire, large-scale programs were launched to distribute this live cargo. The famous orphan trains crisscross continents, delivering hundreds of thousands of children to new families and labor communes. This resembled not so much a humanitarian mission as the industrial distribution of inventory. But the strangest and most frightening aspect of this time was the so-called baby incubators. At world fairs, amusement parks, and international exhibitions, alongside technical achievements, pavilions with incubators were demonstrated. People were sold tickets so they could look at premature babies lying in glass boxes. The official version states that this was a way to fund medicine for nursing weak newborns. But the scale of the phenomenon and its ubiquity lead to grim suspicions. Given the technologies of the past we discussed earlier, it is possible that these incubators were part of a technology for artificial population replenishment. Perhaps we were witnessing a process of repopulating the planet, settling the cleared territories with humans grown in laboratory conditions who had no ancestral memory or connection to the previous civilization. These were ideal blank slates, biomaterial for building a new society. But simply creating new people was not enough. They needed to be programmed. These children, deprived of parents, and thus of the oral transmission of knowledge about the past, became ideal candidates for indoctrination. They needed a new version of reality uploaded into their heads, explaining who they were and where they came from, while hiding the fact of the global catastrophe and the seizure of power. This is where figures like John D. Rockefeller enter the scene, and the General Education Board is created. The Prussian model of schooling is introduced, the main goal of which is not enlightenment, but the standardization of thinking and the upbringing of obedient executors. The compulsory education system became a tool of mass hypnosis. Children raised in orphanages or foster families were handed new textbooks where history was rewritten from scratch. They were told that the majestic buildings around them were built by themselves or their great-grandfathers using primitive tools. They were instilled with the concept of linear progress, where humanity supposedly gradually crawled out of caves into the industrial era. Knowledge of free energy, of giants, of the unified world state of Tartaria was declared a myth or erased entirely. Generation after generation, this fiction was cemented until it became the only recognized truth. We are the descendants of these orphans, raised on lies, having forgotten our true ancestors and our greatness. This global factory reset, this operation to replace humanity's memory, was executed brilliantly. The connection of times was broken. But every crime has a perpetrator and a motive. Those who organized this restart of civilization left us clues, symbols of their triumph, which we see every day but do not understand their true meaning. They made us worship the sign of our enslavement, masking it as a symbol of freedom. To understand who exactly stands behind the curtains of this theater of the absurd, we need to take a close look at the most famous monument of the New World and decipher the date carved on its tablet. 1776. The most recognizable symbol of the New World, replicated in millions of postcards and films, is the Statue of Liberty. For most people, this monument embodies democracy, independence, and hope for a bright future. However, if we discard school narratives and look at this object through the prism of esoteric symbolism and hidden history, a completely different, frightening picture appears before us. The statue towering over the waters is not just a gift from the French people, but a complex occult sign, the true meaning of which is known only to the initiated. The creator of this colossus was Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, a member of a Masonic lodge, and he understood the language of symbols perfectly. His creation is a direct reference to one of the wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus of Rhodes, which depicted the sun god Helios. Even the physical resemblance is striking. The same pose, the same crown of rays, the same gender-neutral face that is hard to call female. But let's dig deeper into the essence. The official name of the monument is Liberty Enlightening the World. In the Latin tradition, the word light-bearer sounds like Lucifer. In occultism, Lucifer is revered not as the embodiment of absolute evil, but as the bringer of knowledge, the enlightener, the one who brought the fire of intellect to humans against the will of higher powers. The torch in the statue's hand is that very fire of Prometheus, or the light of Lucifer. The crown with 7 rays symbolizes not just the 7 continents and 7 seas, but total power over the world, penetrating all corners of the globe. Thus, in New York Harbor stands not a monument to the American Constitution, but a grandiose altar to the light-bearer, the angel of light, who, according to ancient texts, is capable of deceiving nations. Here we approach the most disturbing aspect of this puzzle, the biblical prophecy that surprisingly overlaps with our alternative chronology. Chapter 20 of the Book of Revelation describes the end-times scenario. It says that the devil, the ancient serpent, was bound with chains and cast into the abyss for 1,000 years. This time is called the Millennial Kingdom, an era when evil was isolated and peace and harmony reigned on earth. Perhaps this is the period we see in the remnants of majestic architecture, in stories about wise giants and ether technologies. It was the golden age of humanity crossed out of textbooks. However, the prophecy goes on. After the 1,000 years, Satan must be released from his prison, but only for a little time, for a short season, to once again deceive the nations, gather armies, and prepare the world for the final battle. And now, pay attention to a detail of the statue that is rarely shown in close-up. At the feet of Lady Liberty lie broken chains. The official version claims this is a symbol of the abolition of slavery and tyranny. But in the context of Revelation and the Luciferian nature of the monument, this symbol reads differently. The chains are broken, the prisoner is free, the abyss is open. The statue celebrates not the liberation of people, but the liberation of the force that was bound for 1,000 years. The date carved on the tablet in the statue's hand is July 4, 1776. We are used to considering this the day the U.S. Declaration of Independence was adopted. But what if this date has a double meaning? What if 1776 is the starting point of that very little time? The moment when ancient evil was released to destroy the old world of giants and establish its own order. It is from the end of the 18th century that the era of endless revolutions, wars, the destruction of old morality, the replacement of history, and technocratic enslavement begins. The world plunged into chaos, disguised as progress. If our theory is correct, and we are indeed living in the period of the short season allotted to dark forces for their final game, then the most important question arises: how long does this season last? Any term has a beginning and an end. If the clock was started in 1776, when will the final gong sound? The answer to this question may lie in simple, frighteningly elegant mathematics, which indicates that time has almost run out. If we accept the hypothesis that history is cyclical and obeys strict mathematical laws rather than the chaos of accidents, then we have the opportunity to calculate the final date of the current era. We have already established the starting point, 1776, the moment of the symbolic breaking of chains and the beginning of reformatting the world to new standards. Now we need to determine the duration of that very little time, or short season, that ancient texts warn about. In sacred geometry and biblical numerology, the concept of a season is often interpreted as a quarter of a full cycle. If a full cycle, or aeon, symbolizing an era of harmony, the millennial kingdom, is exactly 1,000 years, then it is logical to assume that its seasonal part is equal to 1/4 of this number. Simple arithmetic gives us a frighteningly precise result. 1,000 divided by 4 equals 250 years. This is the duration of the allotted term of rule for the forces released from the abyss. Now, if we add these 250 years to the date of the founding of the New World Order, 1776, we get the year 2026. This figure is not just a date on the calendar. It is the mathematically calculated finale of the era of deception, the end of that very short season when humanity lived in a haze, forgetting its true origin and greatness. We are standing not just on the threshold of change, we are at the epicenter of the completion of a grand historical act. It is this proximity to the finish line that explains the madness that has gripped the world in recent years. Many ask, why are events developing with such frightening speed? Why do crises follow one another without respite, and the degree of tension in society, the economy, and geopolitics has reached a critical point? The answer lies in the fact that the system knows its expiration date. Those who manage this scenario understand perfectly well that their time is running out. Their actions resemble the behavior of a tenant being evicted from an apartment. He tries to squeeze everything possible out of the premises, destroy what cannot be taken, and make life as difficult as possible for the next owners. We are witnessing the agony of a passing era. All this haste, the introduction of total digital control, attempts to unleash new conflicts and rewrite human biological nature, these are not signs of the system's strength, but symptoms of its panic-stricken fear of the inevitable finale. The year 2026 becomes the event horizon beyond which old rules cease to apply. This explains why so much truth is surfacing right now, why old authorities are collapsing, and why people are massively starting to wake up, noticing inconsistencies in the official picture of the world. The veil is falling because the magic that supported this illusion for 2.5 centuries is running dry. The energy dome that held consciousness in submission is cracking. We are living in a unique time, in the final seconds before dawn, or perhaps before a new, even grander upheaval, the nature of which is yet unknown to us. Everything that happened to us, from the burning of cities and population replacement, to the introduction of false values and the concealment of free energy, was part of a single plan calculated for exactly 250 years. And now, as the hands of the cosmic clock inexorably approach midnight, the masks are coming off. We are witnessing the collapse of the Tower of Babel of lies built by generations. Realizing this fact can cause fear, because the unknown is always more frightening than familiar, albeit false, stability. However, understanding the chronology of events gives us an advantage. We are no longer blind kittens in a dark room. We hold a map and a compass pointing to the true nature of what is happening. We stand on the threshold of events, the scale of which is impossible to imagine, leaning on the experience of the past. But now we have the key to understanding exactly what must happen when the timer stops. Now that we have connected all the scattered fragments into a single canvas, The chaos of historical accidents disappears, giving way to the cold and frightening logic of a grand design. We have traveled the path from realizing the architectural mismatch of our cities to mathematically calculating the end date of the era. It becomes obvious that the giant doors we enter through small gates, the luxurious airships erased from memory, the melted foundations of burned megacities, and the millions of orphans who appeared out of nowhere are not separate mysteries. These are links in one chain, parts of a single mechanism for reformatting reality. We were made to forget that we are the heirs of a great civilization, turning us into service staff on the ruins of someone else's greatness. History, as we have seen, is not a straight line leading from savagery to progress. It is a cyclical process, strictly controlled by those who keep their finger on the pulse of time. The events of the 19th century were not a stage of evolution, but a violent factory reset, a global reboot during which one humanity was replaced by another, weaker, dependent, and manageable. They swapped not only technologies, replacing clean ether with dirty fuel, but memory itself, implanting an artificial chronology into consciousness. We lived in stage sets, considering them our home, and worshipped prison bars, mistaking them for symbols of freedom. That very year, 1776, which is customarily celebrated as the beginning of a new era, actually became the starting point of our oblivion, the beginning of the short season of rule by forces interested in our sleep. But any cycle inevitably strives for completion. The spring compressed 250 years ago is uncoiling right before our eyes. We are living in a unique historical moment when the old program is glitching. That is why the veil of secrecy is starting to tear. Information that was kept in closed archives for centuries or whispered in secret societies is now leaking out, available to anyone who has the courage to look the truth in the eye. The system is in agony, and its attempts to maintain control are becoming increasingly absurd and totalitarian. But these are not signs of its strength. These are convulsions before the inevitable finale mathematically destined for 2026. The main danger now is to let ourselves be deceived again. When the old world starts to collapse completely, the architects of reality will offer us a new scenario, a new saving lie, to launch the next cycle of slavery. They will try to play on our fear and ignorance again. The only protection in the coming times of change is a clear consciousness and an understanding of how this matrix works. Knowledge is the only weapon they cannot take away. If you understand the script, you stop being an extra and become an observer capable of influencing your destiny. We no longer have the right to be naive. The time for children's fairy tales about cows burning cities and kind rulers is over. We stand on the threshold of a new world, and what it will be depends on how many people can wake up from the century-long hypnosis. The realization that we are living at the end of a time loop brings not fear, but liberation. The masks are thrown off, and the king has turned out to be naked. If this deep analysis made you look at familiar things in a new way, if you felt a resonance with this information, do not keep it to yourself. Be sure to share this material with friends and family. The truth must be spread to destroy the wall of silence. Subscribe to the channel so as not to get lost in the coming chaos. The future is already here, and we will meet it with open eyes. See you in the new world.